This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Question: are you happy? Every year, the rankings for the World Happiness Report are released, and this year, Canada has ranked 18. That's a drop from 15th place last year, and more significantly, a drop from our country being ranked 5th in the world. That was back in 2015. So what happened to make us slip in the rankings? How do we compare to other countries, and how do we find happiness again? I'm Pooja Handa, and today on The Big Story, we discuss the findings of this year's World Happiness Report and delve into why Canada seems to keep slipping when it comes to our happiness. Today, I'm speaking with Felix Cheung. He is Canada's Research Chair in Population and Wellbeing and Assistant Professor at U of T's Department of Psychology. Thanks for joining us, Professor Cheung.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the World Happiness Report began collecting and publishing data about countries' perceptions of happiness. This was back in 2005. And the organization uses 6 variables as measurements of happiness. Can you take us through some of them and how citizens give meaning to them?
Yeah, maybe I will first clarify how we rank countries and how we explain country happiness, 2 separate efforts in the World Happiness Report. So in terms of how we rank countries' happiness, it's actually based on just one question. We ask people from around the world to rate their life on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst possible life and 10 is the best possible life. And most people can come up with a rating for their own lives in 10 to 15 seconds. And based on this question, we rank national happiness. In terms of those 6 variables, that is how the World Happiness Report try to explain national differences in happiness. And those 6 variables are GDP per capita, so capturing our economic strength, healthy life expectancy, so kind of like getting at our physical health, how generous people are, so that's asking whether or not people have donated in the past month, how much social support people have, how much freedom people have, as well as the perception of corruption in a country.
Okay, so this year, Canadians ranked our country 18th happiest country in the world. Now, out of 147 countries, being in the top 20, it doesn't seem too bad, but considering we ranked 15th in 2024 and 13th in 2023, this relatively steady decline, it does raise a bit of a flag. What do you actually make of this year's ranking?
I think you're exactly right. First of all, maybe we can first think that we ranked 18 out of 147. And just looking at that, it means that there are some things that we're doing right. You know, Canadians generally are still pretty happy globally. But then it's also concerning that we're seeing a worrying decline in happiness. So you mentioned the ranking in the past 3 years, but in fact, in both the World Happiness Report and in our Canadian Happiness Report, we found this worrying decline has happened since late 2000s. When we talk about this, a lot of times people ask me whether or not it's a COVID thing. And of course, COVID, changed a lot of our life drastically. But it actually looks like the drop in happiness happened long before COVID. So I think it speaks to, whether or not we're focusing on improving lives through public policy in ways that truly matters to Canadians.
Okay, it's interesting because you do mention COVID. And I guess if we take COVID out of the picture then, and we look at Canada at its peak, this was in 2015, we ranked 5th in the world as happiest country. And we were consistent until about COVID. So just wondering if we're going to sort of pinpoint what it is to blame or what is behind the downward trend of happiness. What do you think that is?
When we're looking at that, there are a couple of ways. First is to think about what segments of the Canadian population is experiencing this decline in happiness. So in the 2024 Canadian Happiness Report, we focus a lot on this disparities. So we look at disparities in happiness across many different groups. I would just focus on your groups that seem to stand out from our report. So we found that Canadian youths, people who are under 30, people with lower income, First Nations, sexual minorities, as well as people reporting poor mental health are some of the people that are reporting lower happiness in Canada. So by looking at some of this disparity, we can understand how this worrying decline is not uniform, but what is instead concentrated among certain population. So I think, we really need to pay attention, for example, to Canadian youth, because that's one of the biggest drop in happiness. In last year, World Happiness Report, when they rank youth happiness across nations, I think Canada ranked in the 50s and 60s, so a lot lower compared to our overall ranking. And of course, our youth also speaks to Canadian future. And that seems to be something that we really need to invest our resources in. Maybe to complement this, we also found that another biggest disparity comes from poor mental health, where people who reported having poor mental health being a lot less happy than the general population. So, if we have to make decision based on some of this demographic disparity, it seems like our best bet of reversing this decline would be focusing on youth mental health.
When we're looking at that disparity, it is interesting that when it came to Canadian seniors and where they ranked us in happiness was 8th place, in contrast to 58th place by young people, those under 30. So one of the themes in this report was also about social connections. Wondering, why do you think young folks specifically are vulnerable to the presence of social connections and how they measure happiness?
Yeah, you're right. So tying this back to the theme of the World Happiness Report, which is on sharing and caring, we can think of several reasons. One is that there's a growing trend where people live alone, so solo living arrangement. And in this year's report, we found that when people live with other people, they tend to be happier, they found a stronger sense of social support. So this trend of people living alone, living by themselves, is a worrying trend. Another possibility is about sharing meals. So in the same report, in the World Happiness Report, at least using data from the United States, we found that youths are having fewer and fewer meals with other people, so they're having meals by themselves. And at the same time, in the report, we found that people who share more meals with others also tend to be a lot happier. In fact, just by knowing the number of meals that you share with other people, we can predict your happiness almost just as good as knowing your income. So that's a big deal. So I think you were right in pinpointing how human connections is key to happiness for everyone, but especially for our youth. And we're seeing some of this worrying decline in how we are, living and how we're living on a day-to-day basis, how we're living, with other people or by ourselves. These are some possible factors that are shaping our youth happiness.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. When you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself, talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
So Finland has seemed to hold the top spot for the happiest country since 2017. What are they doing that we aren't?
Yeah, so again, there are probably multiple reasons, but in this year's report, we focus on caring and sharing. And one thing that Nordic countries seems to really jump out to us is the really high level of trust that they have for people around them. So how do we measure trust? Or how do we measure kindness of others? So this is, I think, the first year that we have ranked countries by 3 questions that we call the wallet questions in the report. And it goes to, the question goes, if you lost your wallet, how likely do you think that it will be returned by a stranger, someone in your neighborhood, or by the police? And Nordic countries consistently rank really high on this measure. So, I think that trust or believing in the kindness of others really help these Nordic countries to rank high in our national ranking. If I can build on this a little bit, another major takeaway from this year's report is that people typically underestimate how kind people are. So people are a lot kinder than we give them credit for. When we review global evidence, we found that the return rate of a lost wallet are twice as high as people expect. So there are many reasons for us to hold on to hope for humanity. People around us are actually a lot more helpful. I can even tell you about one study that we review that is actually done in Toronto. When people were asked, if you lost your wallet, do you think that you would be returned? Only 23% of Torontonians think that their wallet would be returned. But when behavioral scientists actually try to drop wallets everywhere, the actual return rate is 80%, which is way higher than 23%.
Wow.
So again, believing in the kindness of others make a difference.
I believe, if I'm correct, I remember reading about that in that situation, the people who were polled were also asked if they would return a wallet. And they said that they would, and yet they had pessimism about whether or not those wallets would be returned if they had lost it. What do you think the reason is behind all the pessimism then?
I think, sometimes when people are faced with uncertainty, it's easy to assume the worst. I think the reason why we focus on sharing and caring and report some of this evidence is for us to regain some of that faith that people are a lot more helpful than we give them credit for. In fact, in a different chapter that I wasn't personally involved in, but it was done by 2 outstanding Stanford researchers, they found even experimental evidence that just by telling people that, some of this hard data that people around us are actually a lot more helpful than we think they are, people become a lot happier. So I think I would just like to go back to the idea around how, people are a lot kinder than we tend to think. And so if you are struggling, if you need help, please feel okay to ask help because people are a lot kinder than we think they are.
That's a nice takeaway. When it comes to climbing back, I guess, in the rankings, if we are actually, as a country, interested in doing so, what do you think some of those areas of improvement are that we have to start to look at?
I think that's the key question. We have been seeing this decline in the past 2 decades. What can we do to reverse this? I think first we have to reflect on what we're trying to do as a country. Maybe this is framing this really broadly, but we need to be able to first define the success of Canada before we can get there. So I think one big idea behind the World Happiness Report is the idea that the success of a nation should not be judged by people's possessions, but by people's happiness. By reimagining what societal progress is, by setting our collective happiness as our shared collective goal, that is one of the first and most major steps that we need to take so that we can align the rest of our actions, the rest of our policy, the rest of our strategies to try to improve life in ways that matters to Canadians. Then we need to measure how far we are from success. That's partly what the World Happiness Report is trying to do. So it looks like, based on our data, we're moving further and further away from this definition of success. So it's absolutely amazing that Gallup, as a private company, is measuring this for so many countries around the world. But we should complement that effort by additional effort from our own governments to collect higher quality, more frequent data about, with greater resolution on how Canadians are doing so that we can design policies to address them. And if you ask me, what can we do to become happier? I think there's two things. One, again, based on all the disparities that we've documented, it seems like youth mental health is our best bet to reverse this trend. And second, tying this back to the theme of the World Happiness Report, we found that helping people improve our happiness and believing in the kindness of others improve happiness. So, if we have the resources, if we have the time, go ahead and help others. And then if we're struggling, people are a lot kinder than we believe. So go ask for help. If we all do this together, we have a lot of reasons to hold on to hope for Canadian happiness. We were able to achieve high level of happiness in the past, so we know how to do this. And yeah, so in today's world, sometimes we can see a lot of news that are concerning, but maybe this is a particular time where we need to again, like, have some faith, have some hope for people around us. And that's how we can improve not just our individual well-being, but also the happiness of the nation.
So I know that you were the co-author on Canada's happiness report. I am curious in terms of our happiness from province to province. Did you find there to be quite a difference, or did we have a lot of similarities?
I would say that we have a lot more similarities. So the spread of the happiness score across different provinces is not huge, but we can still focus on some patterns that we're able to identify. So we seem to see that in the Atlantic provinces, people tend to be a little bit happier. And in British Columbia and Ontario, people tend to be less happy. Some of those possible reasons is that, so this is not true for all country, but in the case of Canada, it looks like people living in urban population tends to be less happy, potentially due to reasons like housing affordability or economic uncertainty. But that's something that we should really think about, because city can be a hub to improve happiness for a lot of people, given so many people live in cities.
What do you think we can learn from some of the provinces that are happier than here, let's say?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see, another feature that we see among provincial differences in happiness is that Quebec is a province that was able to maintain their happiness despite a general decline in Canada. We've also looked at whether or not it's about Quebec, or whether or not it's potentially about French-speaking culture or English-speaking culture. One interesting thing that we see is that it looks like this Francophones are able to maintain their happiness, and this Anglophone happiness that's dropping, and maybe it's not purely about Quebec per se. So it really got us thinking, is it about our cultural consumption of media? Because there's a broader trend that's been documented that developed English-speaking countries' happiness has been dropping. Perhaps, a lot of the misinformation, a lot of the polarization has been focused on English media, so that's one possible reason. There could also be other cultural practices, between Anglophone and Francophone that could explain some of this. Sometimes when I talk to people about this finding, people tell me that in Quebec or in Francophone culture, people are a lot closer to each other. People share a lot more views. So again, going back to that idea around human connections.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have talked about a lot of things, from the 6 variables that are used to measure happiness to meal sharing. And I wonder, in many ways, happiness can be very complex. It's far from black and white based on these findings, especially. But in some ways, is being happy really simple? Is it just as simple as connection and kindness?
I think that's what we're trying to focus on this year. But I think, you imagine if all of us think about just a happy moment. Maybe it's a big thing, you get a promotion, you graduated from college. Maybe it's a smaller thing. We're sharing a meal with, our loved ones. in a patio over the summer, chances are happy moments are social. There are people around us. So, human connections is definitely key to our happiness.
Thank you for taking the time to join us, Professor Cheung. You can read the full report at worldhappiness.report and read more about Canada's happiness in the Canadian Happiness Report. That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm Pooja Handa. Thanks for listening.